My name is Mary Sylla, and I work at Rubicon Programs in the Legal Services Department. It's my great pleasure to moderate this panel today, mostly because I just get to listen to all these wonderful people speak about this issue. I ended up in this position because earlier this year there was a job advertised at Rubicon focused on probation, fines, and fees, about which I knew almost nothing. But having been a lawyer working on criminal justice related issues, also at the intersection of public health, including HIV prevention and treatment in prisons and jails for 20 some odd years, I thought it sounded pretty interesting. It's also a policy issue, and I get to provide direct legal services and take the information I learn from my clients who are directly impacted by these fines and fees and then try to make policy change. So it was a pretty sweet deal for me. Our topic today is stopping the stripping of wealth from low-income Bay Area residents, the experience of 3 counties' efforts to end high-paying, low-gain fees charged to people exiting the criminal justice system. Those 3 counties are San Francisco, Alameda, and Contra Costa. Our session goals are to describe the landscape of this issue for you all, to identify opportunities and challenges in local advocacy to reduce these fees, to encourage other county-level advocates and practitioners to do the same thing. So I hope we have folks from the 3 counties I didn't mention elsewhere in the Bay Area who are interested in trying to do this, and to provide concrete recommendations to funders and policymakers to take specific steps to support the movement. We are here at the Asset Funders Network, and as a former development director of a nonprofit organization, I would also be really interested in drawing more funding support to this issue. So I'm going to introduce each of our speakers and then just let us roll. Our slide deck is combined, thanks to Stephanie. And really, these are the experts in the field. There was no question in my mind about who should be on this panel when I learned of the opportunity to present. And we have a special guest star, too, who I'll introduce in a moment. So first, I'd like to introduce Ann Stuhldreher. She's the director of the Financial Justice Project in the Office of the Treasurer for the City and County of San Francisco. San Francisco is the first city in the nation to launch a financial justice project to assess and reform how fines, fees, and financial penalties impact the city's low-income residents. The Financial Justice Project has worked in the city departments and courts to adjust and eliminate dozens of fines and fees. And these reforms have lifted tens of millions of dollars of debt off of tens of thousands of people and eliminated barriers to employment. She's also a senior fellow with the Aspen Institute's Financial Security Program. And after we hear from Ann, we're going to hear from Brandon Banks, who's with the Contra Costa Public Defender. Brandon has dedicated his entire legal career to indigent defense work. He has been an attorney with the Contra Costa Public Defender since December 2002. During that time, he has represented clients in cases ranging from misdemeanors to serious felonies. Brandon has tried over 50 jury trials, including multiple murder and life cases. He's currently the clean slate attorney at the Contra Costa Public Defender. And we're going to hear from Joseph Williams, also, who's a harm reduction case manager in San Francisco. He's personally impacted by the fines and fees issues, and he's going to provide us with a first-person perspective on how they impacted him. And finally, we're going to hear from Stephanie Campos-Bui, who's the policy and advocacy clinical supervising attorney in the Policy and Advocacy Clinic at UC Berkeley. She conducts research on fines and fees imposed on the youth in the juvenile legal system and their families, as well as adults in the criminal justice system, and regularly provides technical assistance to advocates and jurisdictions across the country on these issues. She's the co-author of High Pain, No Gain, How Juvenile Administrative Fees Harm Low-Income Families in Alameda County, Making Families Pay the Harmful, Unlawful, and Costly Practice of Charging Juvenile Administrative Fees in California, and Fee Abolition and the Promise of a Debt-Free Justice for Young People and Their Families in California, which is forthcoming.
Which actually was just released yesterday. So
excellent time. All right, so with that, and that's a lot of introduction, but I prefer to get it out of the way and just let the presentation roll. I'll turn it over to you, Ann.
Okay, great. Is it okay if I stand? Do I need this? Is it on? It is, okay. Let me go right here. Thank you, Stephanie. These slides look so much better than if these were my slides. So thank you, Stephanie. So first off, it's just great to be here, and I'm glad we're talking about this at this conference. I think that, a lot of the things in general we're talking about here are how do we kind of build up people's economic reserves who are at the hardest edges of the economy, And I think what we have all found in our work is that there's a lot of things government does to actually strip those very important resources and economic reserves, especially of lower income families and people of color. And so that is the work that we've been doing in San Francisco for the past couple years, and so many other people have been doing across the state. So Joseph and I are gonna, who's our partner in this work, we'll start off just talking about our experience in San Francisco. And there we all are. So I first want to just put up a bill. I am in the treasurer's office after all. But this is one of the first things how I started thinking about this issue. This is a bill owed by a woman named Nicole. I first talked to her a few years ago. This has all of her fines and fees that she owed from her time in the criminal justice system. As you can see, there's a bunch of them, and they add up to about $5,000. At the time when I met Nicole, she was living in the Fillmore, mother, raising 2 daughters. She was working 2 jobs. She was working at Target and as a home health care aide. She's making about $1,200 a month, and we were garnishing her paycheck for about $300. So to pay for a lot of fines and fees, and I do want to point out, like, fines and fees are different, right? Like, fines are meant to discourage behavior. Fees are only meant to recover costs. That's their only job. They're not meant to be punitive. But there's a lot of fees, and they end up kind of acting like fines and being punitive. The biggest one on here, I want to point out probation costs, $1,800. Joseph is nodding. Yeah. In San Francisco, we were charging people $50 a month to be on probation. Since people are typically on for 3 years, we were charging $1,800 up front. We were charging up to $35 a day to people to rent their electronic ankle monitor. There's all these things up here. Pre-sentence report, $150. You're charged a few $100s for fingerprinting, crime lab fees, et cetera, et cetera. So for Nicole, she had gone into our public defender's office, who's a very important partner and leader in this reform. She had asked for a printout of what she owed because she had just gone through a course to become a LVN nurse. And she couldn't get that license, though, until she paid this off. So it just seemed insurmountable. And I think a lot of us in the advocacy community and then across city departments started having this discussion about, like, what are we doing here? So we started to look into it, and I think, and this is a frame that was originally put forward by UC Berkeley, we concluded pretty quickly that these fees are high pain and low gain. The high pain, I think, is pretty obvious. For people like Nicole, they create huge barriers to people's reentry. San Francisco is a very expensive place. You really need every penny when you're coming out of the criminal justice system just to pay your rent, support your family, etc. And there was $32 million that was owed by 21,000 people in our community. Our research showed that the median income of people who owed this debt was very low. It was around $2,500 a year. I think the high pain report, and this has some few things from our, about kind of where the debt was coming from, and the big bulk of it was from probation fees. And then, low gain. So again, I report to the person who's in charge of revenue for the city and county of San Francisco. And as we looked at this, again, the math just didn't add up. The collection rate on the largest fee, the monthly probation fee, was just 9%. And then across all these fees, it was 17%. Stephanie in UC Berkeley, maybe she'll talk about this, has done research on counties where with juvenile fees, and we're starting to see this with adult fees as well, some counties spend more to collect this money than they bring in. So again, just didn't make sense. Here's Nicole's story. So what we decided to do, and again, this took a lot of advocacy, a lot of collaboration, a lot of people like Joseph kind of coming forward to really push us in government to do the right thing. And we became the first place in the nation to eliminate all of our local fees. We wrote off $32 million in debt that was owed by 21,000 people. And we know that that money was never going to convert into revenue really and come in, but it was hanging over so many people in our community and just really holding people back. It's been fun. People have been bringing us their bills and just to see kind of what is happening kind of post-reform. And again, like there still are state fines and fees, and we're actually like working on that through, and Stephanie will talk more about that through the Families Over Fees Act. But it's been really gratifying for people to kind of get it down to a manageable level, and then we're hoping to eliminate the rest of these through statewide legislation. I think Joseph, do you want to talk now just about, so I just want to say Joseph, I think was introduced, but he's been an important partner in this work. He's testified, helped push us towards reform, and done some speaking to the media, etc. So I'm really glad that you could be here today.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me. So first of all, I want to thank you guys for having me, and I'm speaking from lived experience. So realizing that I have this hurdle to overcome of not only getting housing, being a student, and finding an employer that will accept me for having a criminal background wasn't my biggest hurdle. The difficulties of having a criminal record, and finding a place that will hire me, which I did. I overcame that. I did find a place that would hire me. I did find a school to go to that would accept me with my criminal background. And once I was accepted and I started working, I realized that my wages are being garnished, and I had no idea that these fines and fees even existed. And I guess it's something that when you are released, it's something that you technically do sign off on, that you will pay these probationary fees and all these other fees, but I'm not sure if too many people are, number one, even literate enough to read the small print of what's going on. So getting paid $26 an hour and getting paid bi-weekly, having up to $700 garnished bi-weekly out of my check, put me in a real rut. So what I ended up having to do is work several different jobs, and me being a single father with children, 2 children, I had to find the different daycares that would accept my children at different times of the day, work up to 2 extra jobs, and I wasn't getting to spend the time that I wanted to spend with my children. And the time that I did get to spend with my children wasn't quality time. I was emotionally drained, physically drained. And it's not something that I could talk to my small children about, why daddy is feeling the way he's feeling. And like I said before, I had no idea these fines and fees even existed. At first I thought it was the IRS garnishing my wages, but the same, like you were speaking about the young lady, I came to the public defender's office, and Jeff Adachi was there, and he actually broke it down to me exactly what was going on and told me that he was working on a policy that could help assist others. And I'm very thankful that San Francisco moved forward with this, and they moved forward with this relatively fast. And as soon as this bill was passed, they immediately stopped garnishing my wages. And I just want you guys to know that the quality of my life and my children's life greatly improved soon after. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes. Thanks. I can share.
Oh, you want to go up there? Okay.
I didn't want to speak more. If we have the time.
Good afternoon. Again, my name is Brandon Banks, and I'm an attorney at the Contra Costa County Public Defender's Office. And as you heard from the introduction, I'm currently leading the Clean Slate program in our office. So in my role as the Clean Slate attorney, I often witness the way that court-imposed debt really affects the people that I represent. One of the primary things that I do as part of my job in the Clean Slate unit is to help people seek post-conviction relief and to help them clean up their records. Now, the problem historically has been that these outstanding fines and fees, this court debt that we're here to talk about today, has often acted as a barrier to people cleaning up their records and to getting their lives back on track. Courts routinely, particularly in Contra Costa County, would deny people post-conviction relief, deny people the ability to clean up their records simply because they owed outstanding fines and fees. But the impact of court-imposed debt goes beyond just record clearance, and it has a really significant impact on all of our communities. Court-imposed debt and fines and fees associated with the criminal justice system increases incarceration rates. This can happen in a couple of different ways. It can happen at the pretrial stage, where oftentimes people might have the opportunity when they've been charged with a crime, often a non-violent, non-serious crime, where they are in custody, and they'll sometimes be given the opportunity to be released on to electronic monitoring, where that will hopefully allow them to get back with their family, to maintain family stability, to not lose their job. The catch, however, is that the person has to pay for the electronic home monitoring. And that's often a barrier to someone getting out of custody and maintaining their job, or taking care of their kids, or ensuring that their family is not broken up. On the other side, people who are might be resolving their case when they start out of custody, they're often faced with this Hobson's choice of either having to come up with some money to pay for home detention or work alternative program, or because they can't afford to pay for that, they have to go into custody, where they are again at risk of losing their job, losing access to their children, and putting their families in very vulnerable positions. Wealth has also been extracted from the most vulnerable people in our communities as a result of these fines and fees. Many of the people that I represent are often on the verge of poverty, or they are already impoverished, and they're on the brink of losing their houses, losing their low-paying jobs when they're facing custodial time. And that limited income that they have, or that they're receiving, is often redirected from providing for the basic necessities of their family, things as basic as buying diapers, groceries, clothing for their kids, is often redirected to paying off these fines and fees that they are facing. It also creates significant barriers to housing. You heard Joseph talk about that just a moment ago. These prevent people from getting housing, from improving their housing situation, prevents them from paying for their education. These fines and fees act as barriers to cleaning up their record, which can lead to improved employment opportunities. It also has a generational impact, these fines and fees. It doesn't only affect the person that's facing this debt, but it affects their children, it can affect their grandchildren, it can go on and on. And so one of the things that we have been able to achieve in Contra Costa County is a moratorium being imposed on the locally controlled criminal fees. This moratorium went into effect back in September. So on September 17th of 2019, the Board of Supervisors in our county voted to impose a moratorium on the following criminal justice fees: booking fees, drug diversion fees, drug testing fees, probation supervision fees, which I'll come back to in just a second, investigation report fees, electronic monitoring fees, work alternative fees. Those were the two fees that I just talked about that prevented people from being out of custody both before their case resolved and after their case resolved, and public defender fees. The probation supervision fees, you heard about how this has significantly impacted people and talked about the role that they played in San Francisco. And the case is the same, or was the same, in Contra Costa County, where people who were convicted of very low-level crimes, for example, simple possession of drugs, were faced with thousands of dollars of probation fees for the most basic, the non-violent type of crimes you can think of. But they are now facing down thousands of dollars in debt through probation fees. The moratorium, not that I particularly care, but has had a very limited impact on the county.
Not your problem.
So, very limited fiscal impact on the sheriff's office and the probation department. The moratorium, I think, will reduce the county revenue by approximately $1.7 million. The combined budgets of the sheriff's office and the probation department are over $200 million. So it's going to have a very limited impact on the sheriff's ability to detain people of color and probation's ability to supervise many poor people and people of color. But the moratorium will have a very positive impact on many people in our community. It will reduce the incarceration rates. People no longer will face that Hobson's choice of either going into custody or trying to cobble together $1,000 so they can pay for electronic monitoring fees or work alternative programs. The income is no longer being diverted from their family to the criminal justice system. And that income can be reinvested into the local economy. People now can purchase things for their families. They can hopefully have their kids play in a sport rather than having to make that choice of paying that $50 for the kid to play basketball or soccer, and instead having to go to court-imposed debt. I consider the deletion of criminal justice fines and fees to be essential to criminal justice reform. It's also essential to rebuilding our communities, but I kind of want to close with this. I think in order to be successful in this area and other areas of criminal justice reform, we need resources and funding to be provided to the community-based organizations and the programs that are fighting for criminal justice reform, like the elimination of criminal justice fines and fees. Whether we're talking about programs like Rubicon, the San Francisco Financial Justice Project, the Policy Advocacy Clinic at the Berkeley School of Law, or public defender offices, we all need appropriate resourcing and funding. I consider all of us to be at the tip of the spear when it comes to criminal justice reform, but we can't do the work that we need to do without the appropriate resourcing and funding. Thank you.
I'm never bigger than the podium. Here's Brandon's contact info. I will say, public defenders. Without public defenders, I don't think any of us can do this work, both trying to understand how things operate in counties, but also to then, get access to people who are impacted. So I just want to props to the public defender's office. So my name is Stephanie, and I'm a supervising attorney at Berkeley Law in one of our law school clinics. And just for those of you who aren't familiar with law school clinics, they're kind of like residency for lawyers. So a lot of our students get to work on real life projects, representing clients on research and advocacy related issues. So one of the projects we've worked on for the last few years has been on fines and fees in both the juvenile system and the adult system. I'm mainly going to be talking about adult today, but just to note, this is happening to young people and their families in the juvenile system, and which is, I think, particularly problematic. I think even more so when we're talking about people re-entering into the adult system or out of the adult system. With young people, we're talking about people just starting their lives. So just want to plug that before getting into. All right. So I'm going to be talking about fees mainly in the adult system, but I do want to give some context before starting. First, there are probably hundreds of thousands of people in California who have some sort of criminal justice debt. Anne mentioned a little bit earlier about kind of the distinctions between the types of debt. And I think the three big ones that we'd like to talk about are fees, fines, and restitution. And fees are really supposed to be about recouping costs. So theoretically, courts and counties being strapped for funding, they then charge people for certain court operations and programs that are offered. Fines and restitution, on the other hand, have different functions. Fines are supposed to be punitive, but as we heard from Joseph, the idea that something can be punitive and be a deterrent when people aren't aware of it doesn't really happen. Restitution then is kind of amounts that are ordered against a person for any alleged harm that's done to our particular victim. So that's another big chunk of money that is charged to people that can be overwhelming. And I think the point that I want to make with that is, even though there are distinctions that we like to make in talking about this and arguing for change on these issues, for a lot of people, and even people that we work with, it's easy to jumble them all together. And I think from the experience of impacted people, they just get a bill. They're not disaggregating by these types of buckets. To them, it's just a huge amount of money that they can't pay. And the last thing I'll say is, I do research on this issue, but it's important to note that even the Legislative Analyst's Office, who theoretically has access to a lot of data and research on these issues, have said that they don't even have access to complete data on fines and fees. So we're working in a little bit of kind of a bad data world, but we're doing our best. All right. So what have we found in doing this research? So generally our research has shown that fees are harmful, racially disparate, unlawful, and costly. Anne mentioned a little bit of the high pain, no gain, but the two other ones I do want to flag as something that I think is really helpful to build out kind of the advocacy in this space. So just jumping to racially disparate, because of over-surveillance and over-policing of communities of color, people of color are often the ones who are bearing the higher fee burdens, again, partly due to over-punishment of people of color in the system at every point in the system. So we're seeing people, black and brown people, having much significant higher fee burdens than their white counterparts. Unlawful is the next point. So there are definitely some counties that are charging fees without conducting any ability to pay determinations, which is required by state law. We have also seen counties that have actually taken kind of cuts from their fees before giving it back to restitution. So under state law, there's certain kind of hierarchy for when someone pays, say, $1,000. There's a hierarchy to it. They're supposed to pay restitution, then fines, and then fees. In LA County, for example, they were taking their cut of probation supervision fees before giving it back to restitution. And A New Way of Life in LA County has actually filed suit around that. As Anne mentioned, there's also kind of a harm and cost kind of finding that we found, and I do want to emphasize, and I think Brandon emphasized this too, is when we talk about costs, it's not just costs to counties and courts. We should be talking about costs to communities and people, because as the revenue is going to the county, that's extraction from communities. So I just want to point that out. So now getting to some of the research. So California state law authorizes counties to charge fees, and really at every point in the system, there is a fee. From booking an arrest, to representation by a public defender, to court-ordered programs, probation supervision, an individual can face a host of fees, even a fee to be put on a payment plan to pay off the fees. And counties generally have discretion on what they decide to charge. In other words, a lot of these aren't required. There are some that are mandatory under state law, but counties generally have discretion to decide what to charge and what not to. And based on fee schedules from counties across the state, we found, and these are just kind of the most common ones that we found, 50 counties are charging probation supervision fees, 44 investigation reports, 33 for drug testing, 31 for electronic monitoring, 28 for work alternative programs, and 27 for a public defender. And again, these are the most common. It's important to note that there are nearly, I'd say, over 100 different fees in state law that someone can be charged to. These are just the most common ones. And because counties have discretion on what to charge and how much, amounts really vary widely across the state. So just taking an example of someone who is on felony probation for 5 years, in LA County, they would be charged over $11,000. But if you just go over a little bit in neighboring county, Orange County, they would be charged about $7,300, and then in Imperial County, a little bit more south, $1,750. Again, this is for one person on 5 years of probation supervision. So just the justice by geography that's happening is astounding. And as you can see by the dollar amounts, fees can quickly add up to thousands of dollars. And once imposed, they're not just bills, they can have severe consequences like we've heard, but I think what's really important to note is a lot of the times they can become civil judgments, which can be enforceable through tax intercepts and wage garnishments. So even undoing some of the fees, we talk about implementing moratoriums and ending collection. There's a lot to be done in the way of actually clearing these off people's records and getting them off or vacating any judgments. So fees are supposed to be helping local jurisdictions recoup costs. Are they doing that? As we heard from Anne, a lot of counties actually recover only a small proportion of what they assessed. This is an example from Alameda County showing the rate of collection on fee accounts over time. So new accounts from 0 to 6 months, you have an 8% collection rate. But as you go longer over time, the collection rate goes down drastically to the point where at 3 years, over 3 years, a 0% collection rate. So the debt really gets stale over time. The idea that a county is going to try to still aggressively collect this money from a family is just not going to happen. It's important to note, though, and I think as Anne noted, low return rates are not a result of lax collection efforts. There's actually very aggressive. In many cases, they actually hire private collection agencies, which is a whole other topic we can talk about. But it's also because most of the people involved in the system are low income. So for example, in Alameda County, the average monthly income of a client of the public defender was $966, and nearly half of the clients represented by the public defender were unemployed. So we're not talking about people with tons of money. A lot of the people just simply cannot afford to pay these fees, and they will never pay these fees. Anne mentioned some of the resources that are spent. This is probably the hardest number to pinpoint, how much a county is spending in time and resources trying to assess and collect fees. But just to give an example again from Alameda County, in fiscal year 2016-17, the county spent about $1.7 million to collect $1.4 million in fees, so a net loss of about $300,000. That's not the case in every county. There are some counties where there is a net positive, but all a way of saying there are costs involved in collection. It's not in a vacuum, it just happens. So that's an important part of the equation. So before turning to reform, I do want to say something about ability to pay. I think when people hear that low-income people, and particularly people of color, are not paying fees because they cannot afford to pay, the automatic reaction is, well, why don't we just right-size the solution? Let's make sure that people who can pay, pay, and people who don't pay. But in practice, I think we've all seen ability to pay is problematic for a number of reasons. First, ability to pay is actually an inability to pay process. So it's not as if the court or the judge is showing, here's all the documents I have to show that you can pay. The burden is on the individual person to go back to court, to show up to hearings, to say that I can't pay, and show documents. And I don't know for me, even coming up with my last month's electric bill to renew my driver's license, like, it's hard to find a lot of those things. So there's that. Second, a lot of the times we've heard that ability to pay determinations are not even happening. So here in Alameda County, the chief probation officer said herself that they were supposed to be doing ability to pay determinations for probation supervision fees, and they just weren't doing them. So there was many people who were being charged fees who theoretically could have had reductions or waivers altogether. The last thing I'll say is that basically ability to pay determinations, at the end of the day, whether you have guidelines or rules in practice, at the end of the day, there's someone who's going to be determining whether you can pay or not. And what that looks like in practice is, I think we've seen some kind of really ugly racial bias and perceptions of deserving poor come out. So to the point where, again, in Alameda County, financial hearing officers who were in charge of deciding whether someone can pay or not, when we asked, how do you do that? And the officer said, well, I can tell by whether or not someone's lying to me. And we asked, well, how do you know someone's lying to you? And she said, well, I can tell by the person's handbag. So really problematic ways of, yes. So again, guidelines and rules, sometimes non-existent, even when they do exist, there are people at the end of the day who are doing these determinations. So before, I guess, let me just skip here. There's hope. There's a statewide legislation that's working its way through the legislature that's going to be picked up back again in January when the legislature reconvenes. It's authored by Senator Holly Mitchell and would repeal authority to charge over 50 different fees, including the ones that Contra Costa, Alameda, and San Francisco did away with, but also some of the mandatory ones that they couldn't touch. The bill is supported by a diverse coalition called Debt-Free Justice California. It's about, again, over 50 different organizations across the state. They have weekly calls, meet on a regular basis. And the goal of the coalition is to end fees, but also, I think, largely to eliminate any kind of form of regressive tax that only further impoverishes low-income communities and communities of color. And to kind of just raise issue about how are we funding our critical public safety and court functions? Why are we doing it through fees? Are there other mechanisms that we should be relying on? So fees, I think, is just the start of this coalition's efforts. And while the bill has received opposition from, I think, some obvious actors, the chief probation officers, the California State Association of Counties, I think it's important to note that the opposition has not been against the policy. So they actually agree that funding programs and courts on fees is not good policy. They have understandable concerns with where funding is going to be coming to backfill some of that. Again, I think we try to underscore the point that there's not a lot of money to begin with, you're never going to collect it, but I think that's going to be ongoing conversations in the next couple months about how backfill might happen. And the last thing I'll say is just about the coalition. So Debt-Free Justice California, as I mentioned, is made up of impacted people, community organizations, advocates, and local government actors across the state of California. There are 6 different committees that are comprise the coalition. There's a litigation committee, a legislative committee, research, organizing, communications, and messaging, and all together, we collectively work on trying to move SB 144 forward. So if you all are interested in supporting any aspect of this, I know the coalition, I think I can speak on behalf of the coalition.
Yes, you can.
Would be grateful for support in any of these areas. I think a lot of us are just doing this as part of our normal jobs right now. None of us, I think, are getting extra funding to do any of this work. And I do think this would, SB 144 would definitely put California as a leader across the country. No one else has done this yet. So I think that's really important to note. The last thing I'll say is, I think, again, fines and fees is kind of like, I'd say, the entryway to larger criminal justice reform. A lot of what we've seen is, especially on the juvenile fee side of the space, the ability to capitalize on fee reform to then tackle other things. So in LA County, Youth Justice Coalition is doing really great work. After ending juvenile fees in LA County, they are now doing some really inspirational, transformative work around what probation means, closing juvenile facilities. And so this is definitely, I feel like, something that is worth thinking about and investing in. And there's my contact information and more information about Debt Free Justice California. There's a website, follow on Twitter. Yeah, I think that's it for now.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Sure. Cool. Do you want to?
Yeah. Can I just grab that?
Yeah.
One of the things I forgot to mention is for a lot of the people that were in my particular situation, having to pay court-based fines and fees that were from 7 or 5+ years ago, it was financially more lucrative to join the black market and not work a job where their wages could be garnished. And I believe that directly relates to recidivism, right? Because these people that have these mastermind plans of I'm not going to get caught again, do get caught. And that's happened to a lot of my brothers that were on the right path and they realized their wages were getting garnished and they just said, you know, this is not something I'm interested in. I have something that's way more lucrative financially that can support my family, that can support me, and I can have the time to do the things I need to do. And the quality of life will be a lot better for me and my family. And that's something that I think we all briefly spoke on. You know, it does add to recidivism, and I think that's one of the biggest things. You know, so for Alameda County, Contra Costa County, and hopefully LA or Los Angeles County, hopefully follow behind us. So, yeah.
Thank you for saying that, Joseph.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I want to open it up to questions. I want to point out a couple things that came to mind. However, you know, recognize that when an ability to pay hearing is being conducted in a court, all of the same biases, racial, everything else that our criminal justice system has are being played out. And in seconds, I mean, Brandon can talk about what an ability to pay hearing looks like in criminal court. I've heard of people being told, well, where did you get those shoes? You know, what kind of bag are you? It's maddening to think that. Also, consider the fact that the public defender fee that folks are being charged, that money doesn't go to the public defender's office. And why should it be charged anyway? If somebody is using a public defender, apparently there's already been a determination that they didn't have enough income to hire their own attorney, and so they were given a public defender. So there's many, many aspects of this that are just crazy making. And the other thing, last thing I want to say at this moment is that, you know, this is at this juncture in between criminal and civil law. I consider myself a civil rights attorney. I've worked around the criminal justice system, but always found it kind of refreshing to be able to tell folks in jails and prisons who I was trying to help on civil rights issues, don't tell me about your criminal case. I don't know anything about criminal law. Brandon's a public defender. He's working with criminal defendants, but then he's got to get on to the next criminal defendant because he's got a stack of files like this. And now this person has been in a court, you know, told to sign this thing, and they find out they have these fees later. As a civil attorney, I think I would be like, I think that's a criminal issue. And then as criminal defense attorney, I think he'd be like, sorry, I was on to my next criminal defendants. That's part of how this has fallen through the cracks. Most of these fees, correct me if I'm wrong, Stephanie, came about in the 90s, right? Where, you know, the counties had lost money to the state, and they started grabbing these little dribs and drabs of money back. But to grab them back from these criminal defendants, I mean, this isn't like getting a fishing license. Like, I want to go fishing, so I'm going to pay something. You've been pushed into this non-voluntary, to say the least, process. And now we're asking you for dollars to make the whole system work. The criminal justice system is part of our government, our society. We should all support it through taxes. It shouldn't be supported on the backs of these criminal defendants. Do folks have any questions for our panelists?
Illuminated a lot of things that are sort of common sense when you just, you know, when you see it up there in black and white, it's so compelling why we need to do this. So with that prelude, I guess I want to ask the question to Stephanie. In particular, your comment about justice by geography. I put in parentheses injustice by geography.
Yeah.
But, you know, the differential between LA, Orange, and Imperial counties. And my question is, and is that a potential area for a, you know, civil rights violation against a county?
Yeah, no, we haven't done that particular analysis, but I think it's worth doing. I think there have been other research studies that have been done about kind of the composition. I think it's boards of supervisors and city councils and their use of, or their reliance on fines and fees revenue, and there is a a strong correlation. So there are definitely studies about that. I'm happy to send your way. I think one of the things that we've tried to do, again, mostly on the juvenile fee side, because we're now 2 years out of a bill that ended juvenile fees, so it's a little bit of an easier kind of comparison point from before and after, of looking at how did the makeup of Board of Supervisors impact their decision of whether or not to end fees in advance of statewide legislation. But I think there is a strong, I would guess.
Hey, Stephanie, and correct me, you probably know the answer to this. I think there is this, I believe, isn't there a study that shows that the greater the population of a place that is people of color, the greater the local government's reliance on?
Yeah, I think it's census to view, but I'm happy to follow up and send that your way.
I think so, yeah. Whoever.
So this is a question for the two of you who are in the public employment, I guess. Is there any value to the county to having this amount that they're not going to collect on the books, but they're not writing it off either? Is there some political value that county commissioners see, or that your officials rely upon?
I mean, so I think it may perform a certain function, like on a balance sheet, like to make everything kind of add up. That was like a big part of the process in San Francisco, was kind of talking about that amount of money and then looking at, in our case, it was $32 million in outstanding debt. We were projecting only I think $1 million of that would actually come in. So that helped us kind of make the case. But, it's a fairly big price tag at the local level. So there was a lot of education. And, as Stephanie said, whenever we went into a meeting about this, I think people's first reaction was, oh, just lower it. Why do we need to eliminate it? Let's just, as you said, kind of right size it. And, we were making the case no, it's, if 95 or 90% of people can't pay this, it just, it makes more sense just to eliminate that. And again, this isn't, it's not the right use of, a fee. They're supposed to cover costs. They're not, we need a more fair and just way to fund our criminal justice system. And so I think that's, and I'm glad you brought this up. I'm so excited that I feel like locally and regionally, and LA, I think, is going to be joining us soon, fingers crossed. We're starting this conversation, and as Stephanie said, because I remember we were all watching, there was this Senate hearing, and there's this big debate, and a lot of Republicans were speaking about this, and we kept waiting for somebody to slam it, and everybody was saying I agree on the policy, and we need to figure out the revenue side of it. So I feel like we've moved this conversation a lot in California. And we're also starting to see other counties around, Dallas, around St. Paul, around Nashville, that are all moving to eliminate these. And so I think we all get calls from people all over the country. So, I'm just really excited about all the momentum.
Yeah, I was actually, it's great work because you've been able to kind of put some sunlight on this issue, and a lot of people weren't aware of it, and now it is picking up traction in your region and all over the country. So I was going to ask, when they are calling Ann or for you guys, what are their biggest issues, or what's a compelling argument? That was kind of one question I had. And the second one is there work to be done on the savings side? You talked about, 1.7 million for your county. You're not worried about it, but it is part of the budget. But there's lower incarceration rates, there's a cost there. So maybe for the academic, can you start tallying up some of those savings, so then some people that really want to do some of this cost benefit analysis can say, hey, there are some real savings here, and obviously you've identified the categories. And those are real impacts. But yeah, can we quantify it? What's the next step there?
Yeah, when Alameda County was contemplating, again, this was 2016 juvenile fee repeal, we had a group of master public policy students do kind of cost benefit analysis of what it would mean to end juvenile fees. And I think it was in like perpetual, $5.5 million in savings just from ending juvenile fees and like $175K a year. So we've started some of that. That's just one county, but I do think it's worth doing that some more. On the former question about when we get calls from other places, what are they asking about? I think a lot of the times, I think they're coming from places that are not California, and I think they see kind of the arguments about we need to hold people accountable, this is about punishment, and so a lot of that is just trying to walk them through. There are distinctions between these buckets of costs, and that's been really successful. And also I think one thing that we try to emphasize, whether or not it's comfortable for whoever the policymaker is on the end of it, is this is about racial disparities in our criminal justice system, whether or not you want to hear it or not. And it's important to lead with that, because if we just talk about cost, once it becomes cost efficient, then there's no longer a case. So it's important to also be both, this is about cost, but it's also about the way the system operates. So that's one thing I think that we try to talk people who are wanting to do this work about why it's still worth doing. But yeah, I think that's some of the calls that I get.
I mean, I think what Joseph was bringing up, the biggest driver of costs in the criminal justice system is recidivism, and how, taking a big chunk of somebody's paycheck doesn't exactly set somebody up to succeed. And there is research that shows and Stephanie can keep me honest on these studies I'm quoting, that shows that there is these types of fees, do fuel recidivism rates. I mean, I think some of the questions I get, it's interesting because I think when people first hear it, sometimes people who aren't familiar with the criminal, like they kind of conflate fees and fines, and they're like, wait, isn't this part of somebody's sentence, or isn't that? And it's like, I think once people understand, people paid all kinds of consequences. They've done time, they're paying fines, like everything we've talked about, and then these fees are leveled on top. And I do think this whole like high pain, low gain, like, it doesn't add up, like the position we put people in versus like this little bit of revenue we eke out for us in government and what we're spending to try to collect that. So I think that case seems to be resonating, I think, with people across the country.
Yeah, also, I was informed that you would not be able to get off of probation until your fines for probation were paid. So that keeps you in kind of, repetitive circle of keeping you on probation longer and paying these fines a little bit longer. So
it was also like, and I don't know, Brandon, if you like the conversation with our probation department was interesting. So I mean, at first it started maybe not, it was like, okay, I see what you're saying, but this is an important source of revenue. And then we like kept talking about it, kept bringing people forward, and people kept coming forward and talking about their experience. And then it, I think, kind of shifted to our probation chief saying, like, that she wanted her folks to be able to help people get jobs and housing and not act as collections officers. Because they weren't really well, like you hear about these kind of crazy, like looking at if somebody has their nails done, or somebody's bag or shoes or something to guess if they can, pay these type of fees. Our probation department also was supposed to be doing an ability to pay determination. They were not. So again, I think it's, if you have a couple minutes with someone, I think you can, make the case, but But again, I think this is something like most people don't realize we do to folks, you know, who are going through the criminal justice system. So, you know, it's long past time we started talking about what's wrong with that, the disparate racial impacts, kind of as you said, and what we can do about it.
So thank you so much for the work that you're doing, and really this is really informative. I'm curious to know about, so you talked about San Francisco, Contra Costa County. What has been done in Alameda County and or is planned?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't had Alameda pieces, but I didn't say. So they actually repealed back in, I think it was October 2017 now. So October 2017, they repealed all of their kind of locally controlled fees as well. I think theirs was about $42 million in debt that they wiped off the books. I think there was consensus on the board, in part because, again, I think part of what has teed up, I think, some of this conversation a little bit, is getting them to, a lot of the counties, 38 of the 52 counties in California had both ended assessment and collection of juvenile fees. And so the idea when we were first starting juvenile fees of like, this is about fees, this is not about punishing people, you know, this is harmful. Like, I remember going to Alameda for the adult hearing, and we were about to start our whole spiel about this is about fees, and the supervisor was like, yeah, we got it. Like, they didn't even need convincing anymore. So I think that some of what we've started to see here is just like the arguments that we had to make a couple of years ago, and it depends, Contra Costa is smaller.
Yeah, there's a
like
contrast.
we just haven't had to do that anymore.
Yeah, I would say, so San Francisco, it was this sort of, I would say, inside job, right? Because the Financial Justice Project is inside the treasurer's office and organized it, and I could be, correct me if I'm wrong, and brought everybody to the table, and then the resolution was passed, doing away with the fees. Is that correct?
I think it was a inside outside,
Okay.
You know, to be honest. Like, I think, and I don't know, I think if Joseph remembers this, but there were a lot of times where like this almost, I remember going into this one hearing and the person was not supportive, who was the head of this committee, and was not convinced, and then so many people came to that hearing and just lined up and started. I still remember, because we all, you know, were up there kind of testifying, and then it opened for public comment, and, you know, there was this huge line of people, and then that person changed their mind. And so it wouldn't have, if there weren't a lot of, you know, grassroots organizations, you know, again, UC Berkeley had done such amazing research. So many people came forward. I think that was really what tipped it. Yeah, and when we were trying to organize and work with everybody inside, and our, you know, we were talking yesterday about Jeff Adachi, who I don't know how many folks in this room ever knew. Jeff, he was our public defender, who was an amazing person. Joseph was actually talking about going to the office on Thanksgiving Day and finding Jeff there, which I'm not surprised about. And he, you know, unfortunately passed. And so, you know, again, I'm just so grateful to him and his leadership in this space as well.
And then I wanted to compare it to Alameda, because from what I understand from Alameda County, things went pretty quickly, right?
Yeah, so the East Bay Community Law Center, which is the largest provider of legal services in Alameda County, they had a good connection with the public defender's office and the probation officer there, and were able to get probation, the Department of Revenue, and the public defender's office to submit a letter to the board requesting a repeal of all fees. So I think the relationship building, but it also came from the heads of departments, as opposed to even the supervisors themselves trying to push it on to the department heads.
And Chief Still, the chief of probation, who has the AB 109 money, at least somewhat within her purview, offered to backfill the funds that would be lost from these fees in that case. Totally different story in Contra Costa, where we are. We don't even have a full repeal. We have a moratorium. And the court has even said, well, what does that really mean? We stop collecting fees now? If we wipe the fees out, the fees are wiped out. So there's really no distinction between a moratorium and a repeal. We also had almost no forethought of implementation, but we wanted the moratorium, so the advocates decided not to make a big deal about no forethought of implementation. But Brandon, how do you feel about implementation of our moratorium as of today?
Well, you heard at the Public Protection Committee meeting that we both attended yesterday. It's very slow in terms of the implementation. I think many folks who are advocating for not only the moratorium, but the permanent deletion of the locally controlled fines and fees have been very frustrated with how slow the implementation of the moratorium has been. Part of the problem is that we don't have a consensus from all of the relevant actors involved. One of those being the court. I think courts generally take a very antiquated and regressive approach to criminal justice reform issues. That certainly is the case in Contra Costa County, where we have a relatively conservative bench, and they have pushed back in a lot of ways. So that's been really frustrating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not the same. We have 3 counties and we're talking about it like it's one consistent theme, sort of, because in some ways it is, and certainly from an advocate's perspective, we want it to work that way. On the other hand, the details are very different between these counties at this point. And I mean, in my mind, that underscores the need for support by the funders network of advocacy on this, because it's not going to get done organically. Thank you, we have 10 minutes. It is something we need to keep, we need to keep pushing, and we need to keep pushing with resources.
Can I just circle back to one of the points Stephanie was making about ability to pay not being the answer? In the job that I do, I see that every day, and there is a particular transcript that I want to share with people just to kind of give you a flavor of the inhumanity that many of our clients suffer when they are dealing with the ability to pay issue. So let me just pull it up. So I was not the attorney on this case. I was not present. I might have ended up in custody had I been, based on what one of our clients had to go through. There was a person in custody, an impacted person in custody, who was resolving their case. Again, a very low-level case. The person was charged with possession of methamphetamine, homeless person. At the end of the sentencing, the attorney who was representing the impacted person asked the fines and fees be waived. The judge then allowed the DA to question the impacted person on their ability to pay. And here is how some of the questioning went. Just find it. Okay, from the court, Mr. Dang, who is the DA, would you like to be heard? Yes. Sir, this is the DA. After your release, how do you plan on eating? The impacted person. Eating? Question mark. The DA. Yes, if you're not working. The impacted person. Well, there's a church around the corner from my parents' address on Appian Way. They have free meals every Wednesday. The DA. So how do you plan to eat the other days? The impacted person. Well, I've survived with less. The DA. How do you plan on eating on the other days? Well, I've been known to drink water for consistent of 2 weeks straight without eating. The DA. Sir, do you plan on getting money so you can eat? I plan to, but to understand how it's going to happen, I just don't know. The DA. Before you were arrested, did you have gas in your car? The impacted person. I wasn't in my vehicle when I was arrested. The DA. All right, but you live in your car? The impacted person. Yes, I live in the car and I don't have any gas. The DA. Are you able to pay for gas? No, I'm not able to pay for gas. I don't have any money. I just plan on living in my car. That's just an example of what some of our clients have to endure in order to avoid paying fines and fees that they have very little ability to pay. This is just one example of one of the many indignities that our clients have to go through when they are letting the court know that they don't have the ability to pay these fines and fees. These stories about people asking our clients what kind of shoes are those or how are we able to afford those shoes, that's not just lore, that's happening in court on a daily basis from both judges, from DAs, and even probation officers.
Yes.
Brandon, I have an assumption that we don't have enough public defenders in the country, and I'm wondering, is this part of a solution too? Like, is that a role that you and your colleagues could play in this issue? Like, if there was more public defenders out there, more time for working with clients, is that something that we should be pushing on too?
The short answer is yes. Resourcing is always an issue. I think that public defenders' offices around the country, in California, even in the Bay Area, where we're talking about one of the richest areas, not just in the nation, but in the world, public defender offices are systemically underfunded,
right.
and under-resourced. So yes, I think that we need far more resources to address not just these peripheral issues like fines and fees, but the core issues of representation.
Would you see this as an issue that would be taken on by public defenders if there was kind of better kind of caseload ratios or?
Yes, I think if public defender offices are adequately funded, then they can fund positions such as a clean slate attorney. Not every public defender's office in California has a dedicated clean slate attorney or dedicated clean slate program. So it's because that we do happen to have funding in the Contra Costa County office that I'm able to lead this program and work on these issues.
And then just, this is different than expungement though, like this is like a different set of issues altogether.
Yes.
Overlap at all?
There is absolutely an intersection.
Is gaining some recognition, right?
Sure, there's a critical intersection between fines and fees and expungement or post-conviction relief. I talked about it a little bit at the beginning of my presentation where it's not happening now, thankfully, based on all of the advocacy that we've been able to engage in, but for a long time, the existence of outstanding fines and fees for people were often a barrier to receiving that expungement and getting their lives back on track. So you see the impact of the court-imposed debt both at the beginning when somebody is just resolving their case and at the end where people who have not had contact with the criminal justice system in some cases for many, many years, they were prevented from getting that expungement, from getting their record cleared simply because they were poor.
Yeah, and I just want to say in Florida, I think it got a lot of attention this past year. There was a huge victory there in allowing, I believe it was people on parole to vote. Like so many people had been expunged from the voting rolls, but they have to clear their fines and fees in order to be able to vote. And so, that there has been a big barrier. In about 35 states, your voting rights are restricted if you cannot pay this stuff. So I know we're getting to the end before, I know Mary's probably gonna wrap us up, but this Families Over Fees Act, which Stephanie was talking about, we're so excited about it. We have a great author. I feel like we have a lot of momentum. It would be wonderful if everyone in this room, we need letters of support. We need to show that this type of reform is, it's just in line with our values, I think, as Californians. And we should not have a big price tag on justice in our state. We need to find more fair and just ways to support our criminal justice system. So please, you can give any of us your cards. We'll send you the kind of sample letter of support. It's easy. Please, as Stephanie said, Debt-Free Justice California. Like right now, we're focused on, I'd say, this bill, but unfortunately, there's a lot of things that we're going to be working on as a coalition across the state, and it's a great, very diverse group of organizations, and we would love to have more people join our coalition. So please join us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would. Kelly.
Yeah, has the governor weighed in at all on SB 144? Is he supporting
You've met with staff.
Yeah, we've met with staff.
Yeah.
I think one thing to note, I don't think he's formally weighed in on SB 144, but there was a ability to pay bill, AB 927, that got to his desk, which would have required ability to pay determinations for all fines and fees. And he vetoed it, signaling that he was looking for more comprehensive reform, which I think we'd like to think is, yes, SB 144.
We're choosing to interpret that as yes.
We'll see. So that's, I don't know, Anne, if there are other things you want to say.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think so. I mean, but I do think this was it's a big idea. It's a big bill. It got, it became a 2-year bill. We've gotten, I think, had positive discussions, but there's a lot of competing needs, and so it's going to be important that the governor's office and other people in Sacramento really hear from people across California.
Mm-hmm. And SB 144 would cover the county fees. So the fees we're talking about are ones that the County Board of Supervisors can put a moratorium on or do away with. SB 144 would cover even more. So it would really be a statewide solution to this. And so it would be a huge win. So yes, please write your letters to your legislators about SB 144. One more question?
Yeah,
is it a
quickie?
quickie?
I just want to ask if you could speak to how this potential collection or of fees and fines impacts a person's credit report. Does it go on the credit report?
The Linebarger contract says that the collections agency, which Contra Costa County uses, it actually says explicitly no. They don't want to get into the credit report.
I think
deal.
It depends on the credit agency too.
Mm-hmm.
There's been some like Experian and I forget the other ones who have said that they're not going to mark that on
Once
their.
it goes to collection, once there's a court order, that's.
I think it's possible. I think
Yeah.
potentially. I will say I'm speaking about this collections agency that Contra Costa uses. That for some reason they've said no, they're not going to.
So with the collection agency that took on my fines and fees, that is on my consumer report.
Mm.
That is there.
And does it roll? If it rolls off after a period of time?
I have no idea. I'm yet to.
Now that it's been eliminated or.
It's been eliminated, and that's the
But it
thing I'm
stays
still
on
trying to
credit
figure
report.
out why is it on there.
Okay.
Yeah, but that definitely did show up. So I just want people to be.
Yeah,
aware.
I have no doubt that it could.
So, and Lena, it's complicated in that because our court was saying that, and I believe them, they're not reporting to credit, but some people are scraping data off of court websites, and we've heard a mix of things, it's showing up on some people's credit reports
So
and
there's
not on.
third-party agency that went to collect for me, definitely,
Mm-hmm.
and it made it that much more difficult trying to discover where were these funds or who did I need to address to get these funds removed or address these funds in general. At first, I had no idea who it was, and it's because they were using a third party.
So with that, I'll say, this is an issue because I think we don't want to have a different criminal justice system for people who are rich and poor in this country. It's a fundamental fairness justice issue, and I thank you for listening.